Hi, anybody out there who's logged on to watch us today. Thanks very much for attending. I'm really happy to be speaking to Steve Cheney today, who's our guest, and we're gonna discuss employability skills and music students. So Steve is a long-standing and respected figure in the live production industry. Steve's been a tour and production manager for probably 30 years. Probably, is that about right, Steve?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay, great. And he's spent many years, I think, on the road, and he's worked for some of the large production companies like Asgard and 3A and Kilimanjaro, and been instrumental in stage management at some of the big London UK festivals, Glastonbury, Reading, and Leeds. And he's been a really valuable partner to the college as part of the National Skills Academy. So Steve, could I start off by asking, how's lockdown been for you and for work, the industry?
Well, I mean, it's something that's discussed a lot. As we've just spoken about off air, I'm out in Spain, and it's been slightly different here. Personally, they locked down a lot earlier, and we're back to whatever a new normal is. We're doing it. So, you know, there's freedom of movement. As I say, we're a bit ahead. In terms of work, I mean, I did one interview with Andy Gray on one of these Zoom chats, who's the production manager at Download, Wireless, would have done Leeds this year, and basically spent the summer as a production manager. And he said it just, you know, suddenly it just stopped for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's, nobody's really seen anything like it before. I mean,
Yeah.
there isn't a lot more to it than that. I mean, no one really knows where we're going to go from here. I suspect, my view is that, I mean, I'm of the optimistic view that it might just disappear as quickly as it came, but that doesn't necessarily make it the case, obviously. But I don't think there'll be a lot of touring until 2021. And then you're going to be faced with something that's sort of slightly anarchic, I think, because you're going to have all the acts that are due to tour in 2020, plus all those that are due to tour in 2021.
Yeah.
And there's only a finite amount of funds around for people to go and see these shows. So I'm not quite sure where we're going to go. Festival-wise, I actually thought, and I think I'm sort of constantly in touch with Festival Public anyway, because I still work on Latitude and Leeds, that we all thought that Reading and Leeds might just get over the line, and obviously they couldn't in the end. But I suspect festival-wise, it'll be back to normal next year. And I know that Melvin Ben, who's in charge of all this, Festival Public and Live Nation actually, is working on full capacity plans and various other projects. So, you know, people are dealing with it.
Right, that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think in London, I think one of the fears that people have, but there's very little knowledge around, is whether many low-level venues, small places, will have gone under. You know, whether they'll be able to open again, and hopefully they will.
Well, absolutely, but I think, you know, realistically, you're possibly right. Again, I've been talking to production companies that I work with, like Britannia Row and Orbital, about how they're dealing with it, and I think they're all starting to filter back now, bit by bit, and look to kickstart things as soon as possible. I mean, it's a huge industry that employs thousands of people, so we need it working.
Yeah. I think one of the really interesting things, I think, I could be wrong and stop me if I am wrong, is that the way the industry has gone in the last few years is that so many artists make a huge proportion of their living from playing live now, as opposed to selling records.
Definitely.
So income stream has been really affected for many people.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely correct. I mean, you know, that's in the last 10 years, I'd say, that it's been a major source of income. And of course, what that achieved in its own way was that there was a lot more touring done. Therefore, there was a lot more opportunities for work for touring crews. But that's what they started to rely on, and nobody ever expected something like this to happen. So it would have hit some people very hard, notably, as ever, freelancers.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, Steve, I wanted the focus of today to be about your view of the kind of skills and experience that music graduates who want to get into the live music production industry might need. So if I can, I'll kick off by asking you some questions about that. My first question would be, Um, well, it would be this. Looking back, what jobs have you done to get where you are now? What was the kind of career path, the progression path?
Well, mine isn't really the most obvious example because to do what I've ended up doing, you normally come from a technical background, and I didn't particularly. But I started out going back to the 1980, 81, which will be beyond most people's comprehension that there was such a year. I was the entertainment officer at Newcastle University, and I stood for election. I got elected, and at that point, there was a lot of arenas didn't really exist, so all the acts went into city halls, and therefore, you know, the university circuit was quite a big deal. And we had a 2,000 capacity hall, so we put on quite a lot of shows. And in fact, there was 3 entertainment officers, social secretaries, whatever you want to call them, on the trot, for which I was the 3rd, who went down from Newcastle to work for London promoters and agents. And then I worked as a promoters rep. So every show has said promoters rep, who basically is the link between the touring production and the venue. And through that, you start to sort of learn and pick up production values, I suppose. And then it gets to the point where people actually think you're a production manager, and they ask you to go and work for them on that basis. At which point you have to start learning to be fairly quickly. But I've got to say, at that time, it was a very different world, really. You know, there was none of the courses that exist now that your students are on.
Yeah.
And when the advent came about of arenas, we were all sort of making it up as we went along. I mean, now everybody knows exactly what we're supposed to be doing. So it was a sort of strange career path, and how I ended up at the as the stage manager on the main stage at Reading initially was one of the companies I worked for a long time, 2 partners. One of the partners was very good friends, I suppose, one of them, Vince Power, who took over the Reading Festival. And Paul is a great character, Paul Charles, and he sort of decided that I was going to be the stage manager without me having the background or knowledge in any way to do it. But it just demonstrates, and you know, we went down to Reading for the first time having come up with this new system, because it was the first year it went from 2 stages just down to 1, of rolling risers and swapping front of house and monitor control, with no idea if it was going to work or not. So that was quite a nervy time, but it did. But I suppose what it demonstrates is that it's a question, really, a lot of it, of common sense, and being able to see the bigger picture. You know, you can't, as a production manager, I mean, I know about rhythm and I know about power, but you wouldn't necessarily want me to put me behind a sound desk. I know how it works, but everybody has specialist skills. So I think the way to go really is that, in some aspects, is for students to pick the field they want to work in and concentrate on it. It's not to say you can't wear a number of hats. I did. I mean, I was a tour manager, a production manager, a stage manager, and even for quite a time, a tour accountant, which would have had several of my maths masters spinning in their respective grades, I'm sure. So you can fulfill a number of roles in it. But I think to get into it, you need to concentrate on one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we have students, you know, who are interested in lighting. We have students who are interested in sound engineering. Sound engineering, live sound engineering is a big thing for students, obviously. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting.
Actually, can I just interrupt you there for a minute?
Absolutely.
No. One of the things we do, I mean, you came to Music Bank, as you said. We do also run, and are going to continue to do so when this calms down a bit, production days at Britannia Row, at Orbital. I haven't done one at Music Bank for a while, but I'm sure they'd have one. And also probably do another lighting one at Meg Earth. So we're going to put those out there either at the end of this year or the start of next.
Right. Okay, that would be great. Yes, I would be interested. It was really interesting for me and for students going to Music Bank because, I mean, it's quite near the college, and it's in a really nondescript part of southeast London. It's on a trading estate in Bermondsey, and you go in there and there's graffiti in the lift done by Beyonce, which was really interesting both for me and the students to see. So there's very contemporary artists working there, but there's a big room full of guitars belonging to Peter Green. And I think there's a big room of tapes belonging to Phil Collins. So there's a whole range of people from, you know, different eras of music there.
Yeah, great. I'm glad, I'm glad it was a a good day out for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you've worked as a tour manager for along the way at some point you mentioned there. Can you, I think most of our students won't have a concept of what a tour manager does really, Steve. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, a tour manager, there's any number of roles on a tour that people won't be aware of. But the two that are sort of most, apart from sound engineers and lighting designers, there's production assistants, there's video, there's drivers, there's caterers, there's wardrobe assistants, dressing rooms, whatever. The tour manager essentially is in charge with the production manager. I mean, when I started out, the tour manager was in control of everything. Now, I think you'll find they work closely with the production manager, and the two are on the same sort of level. And the production manager is essentially the tour manager for the crew, who's in charge of the crew. The production manager being the one who's in the building first in the morning and out last at night, effectively, in first with the riggers and the caterers. And you won't necessarily see them out on the floor a lot, because with all these things, it's all about what you do in the advance. Riders are sent out months in advance to promoters, detailing every single detail of what's required to make the day run smoothly. So the production manager is always there on site, probably in the office advancing the next set of shows. We'll sort of amble out from time to time to see how things are going. But during the course of the day, we're leaving it to a stage manager to coordinate everything and make sure it's running to time. And then they'll go to him if there's a problem. The tour manager spends more time with the artist. So they travel with the artist. And again, it's changed a bit. When I was doing it, well, I probably stopped really doing it 10 years ago, effectively. But it had changed from when I started out. When you started out, the tour manager used to arrive with the band at 4 o'clock for the sound check. And then be there all the way through and deal with everybody in terms of guest list settlement, making sure the band have got what they need, what they want. Nowadays, you're more likely to see the tour manager in the venue from sort of 10 a.m. and then go back to get the band for the sound check, because there's so much more to be done. The advance of technology has inevitably moves things along. But in some ways, there is even more to be done. I mean, especially at arena level, which changes dramatically from City Hall level up in terms of our favourite occupation is doing guest lists, as you can imagine. So tour managers tend to be there, but they travel with the band. They'll be responsible for the budget generally. And as I say, I'd say the tour manager, and along with the production manager, run the show.
Right. Okay. So, would you say that during your time in the live industry, it's become more corporate, or has it always kind of been the same that it is now? And have you got any thoughts on that at all? Have things improved over the last 30 years, 25 years?
Yeah, I mean, so things have moved on dramatically. As I said, with the advent of arenas, it changed, massively from just going into. Basically, all we did was 3 truck tours going around city halls, maybe doing the Albert Hall in London or whatever. Now you do an arena tour, 15 shows maybe, anything from. I mean, you don't see an arena tour with less than 6 trucks. The norm is about 12 to 14. You get the odd exception. We did a lot of visits with Muse on their last tour, which was a 21 truck tour, which they're getting in, and it's incredible, really. I mean, they've loaded in, and because they had these, it was, well, you can't refer to them as drones. Health and safety officers don't really like drones in enclosed buildings. But they were helium-inflated objects, which were all programmed and sort of went around the room.
Right.
But to program those, you had to have a sterile building by 2 p.m. which means it all had to be set and dark by 2 o'clock. I'm getting 20 trucks worth of gear, 1 truck's full of merchandise. In and up in that time, it's like a military operation.
Yeah.
And as I say, you get Lady Gaga, same thing, and it was about 22 trucks. But on average, it's 12 to 14, probably 6 sleeper coaches, a crew of, I mean, it could be anything. I'd say your average touring arena crew is about 50 to 60. But it can be a lot more.
Right.
I mean, at festivals, for example, at Glastonbury, you might have visiting crews might number 5 or 6 with the opening act, And then when the Rolling Stones headlined it, they cut their touring crew to a measly 120 work. Yes, it's hard to imagine what they all do. I'm not sure anybody really knows, but they were very nice, actually.
That's good. So yeah, okay. So people working for an act like the Rolling Stones will be very experienced and very disciplined team players, I guess. Which I guess brings me to my next question, really. But what do you think are the key attributes and skills needed by somebody working at that level as part of a big professional crew?
Well, you sort of answered your own question in some ways, because it is the people who are doing arena tours and work with headline acts at Glastonbury and all the major festivals are those at the top of their game, which is why you see the same tour managers, production managers, sound engineers come through with different headline acts each year, because they're the best. And it's the same as everything. You know, there'll be a certain set of skills that some people are particularly good at. Most have come through. I mean, tour managers can evolve in those interesting ways, from chauffeurs to any number of friends of the band, and come through it and stayed with them. You know, there's a number of examples of that happening. So yeah, I mean, it's experience. I mean, as I said, I did one of these interviews with Andy Gray, who's still very active in it. And that's exactly one of the questions I asked him. How did he get into it? And then how did he progress to where he was at? And as he said, it was just a question of, as with all these things, there's an element of luck, being in the right place at the right time, which is what I tell students constantly.
Right.
But then I also say to them, but of course you can, by putting yourself in as many places as possible, there's more chance of you being in the right one at the right time than if you don't put yourself in as many as possible. And again, as I said earlier, you don't have to know everything about everything. But I mean, if I had a secret in how I did the festivals without coming from a technical background, was always make sure I surrounded myself with really good people who liked me and would then get me out of all the trouble I managed to get myself into.
Right.
So, sorry.
Yeah. No. Right. Yeah.
You know, that's it. I mean, there's no. I mean, in terms of becoming sound engineers, what you're doing with your students or line designers is the way to go. Is to come into it with some knowledge, which we didn't really do in the. I mean, when I started out, nearly everybody who ended up working for suppliers in the sound and light and video fields had come from stage crews at city halls, because these things, you know, the courses didn't exist now.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it's one of those things I sort of bang on about to the point of tedium, I have to say, when we do these videos. But just explain to people, you know, get as much outside work experience out of college. Don't put college work to one side in any way, shape or form. But the more things you can put together on a CV or a personal statement or whatever they call these days, the better it is. And that's very important.
Yeah.
And, you know, people are always looking. All suppliers are looking for good people, and never be afraid to ask a question. You know, they're not supposed to know about a lot of this, which is what I say when we go out on visits. You can ask me anything you like. You're not supposed to know this, but hopefully by the time you finish, you'll know a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I'm getting a couple of questions through from people who are watching, which is great. And the first one there is, what do you enjoy most about your job, and what do you enjoy the least? Okay, that's a great question.
Well, that's bizarrely, that's exactly one of the questions that I asked Andy Gray in the interview I did with him. And in terms of the festivals, you know, what people don't sort of understand is a lot of the time, I mean, for me as the stage manager, I'd stop at Reading or Leeds in August and you wouldn't see anybody again from that field until June. I mean, the Festival Republic employs a large number of people all year round, but that was my role. So the first thing is you're getting together with a load of people that you know very well, are friendly with as well as work with. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you go away from something like that, I suppose one of the best moments was at Glastonbury, where the headliners in 3 successive days were U2, Coldplay, and Beyonce. Now that's putting on 3 stadium acts, you know, that would take a week to build at Wembley. in a field in Somerset on 3 successive nights. So, and there's a lot of the headline stuff that we've done down there. Touring wise, I mean, I've been very lucky. I mean, as with all of us, I was lucky enough to go around the world at somebody else's expense, which is a great way to do it. But I had to work quite hard for it, and there's a few tales to tell. So, you know, that's sort of my view, really. How do I expand it? I mean, you know, yes, enjoyed the travelling, the seeing the world. I've worked with a lot of great people. I don't know if I was just lucky, or I suspect that most artists out there are actually generally all right. There's a few that we refer to as challenging employers. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster, really. And yeah, there's a lot. Enjoy least. Andy would say that in his world, as a production manager of very large shows, people not doing their advance properly. With all these things, you've got 10 acts on, and one of those acts hasn't done their advance properly, it's likely to impact on everybody, because it will impact the timings of these events are extraordinarily tight.
Okay.
Right up to the curfew, and the fine's £1,000 a minute once we go over that. So if one act hasn't done their advance properly, you're likely to, I mean, there will be things that will happen. People will be late purely due to travelling issues. I mean, people are flying around into festivals from, you know, coming from Roskilde and Copenhagen over to Glastonbury, and as we know, not all foreign travel works well all the time. So, but overall, I would say there's very little not sort of liked about it. Yeah, that sort of answers it, really, my way.
Great. Actually, so there's a follow-up there question. Somebody's asking, how does it work with sound checks at festivals? If you've got back-to-back artists, I mean, yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, it doesn't. Essentially, the only act that gets a sound check per se at a festival is the headline. Right. Now, about a decade ago, we came into the advent of a double headliner, which I've never quite understood, because somebody has to close the show, and you know, that's the end of it. But we now end up usually having to give 2 acts a sound check in the morning. But that's it. You know, the rest of the day, the bands just come. Essentially what happens, everybody's set up and line checked behind the black, and then, well, somebody's playing on one board from the house and one's we're line checking them on another one, and then we just roll into place, and that's going to be dialed in. So that's how you do it. I mean, if you watch, again, it's a shame we're talking about this as opposed to actually doing it. But when we do go to the festivals, we take people up on the gantry on the main stage, and then we watch a changeover. So, and you see how quickly these things are done. And it generally takes about, I don't know, 4 minutes to strike a norm, you know, a run-of-the-mill mid-table act, if you like. And then you've got another 15 minutes to get the next one on, get it in place, line checked, dialed in, and ready to go. So we don't do changeovers in any less than 20 minutes these days, but that's how that works.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so here's a good question which is related to that. So there's been lots of Glastonbury on TV this summer from former Glastonbury, from former festival from previous years, and this person is asking, has having live TV at the festival made it more difficult? Made production more difficult, I guess is the question, really.
No, I don't think so. I mean, when Adele headlined there, they made no secret of the fact it was essentially a TV show.
Right.
So, but that's a rarity. I mean, generally we work very well with the BBC down there, and over the years we got to know most of the cameramen, you know, line callers, cable bashers, whatever, all the producers. So no, I wouldn't say. The only issue you do get is that you can be ready on stage and they're not ready in the mobile, which was one of the things I suppose you could say I did like least about it, because I'm ready to go, you know. And everybody sort of sometimes forgets that it's the stage manager's neck on the block, no matter whose fault it is that it doesn't run to time. So yeah. that's it's slightly out of your hands, but that happens so rarely. So.
Right. Okay. Great. Okay. So here's another question, which is a different track. Okay. So going back a bit, when you were studying college or wherever you study, this is, I'm reading the question out here, and maybe you were, maybe you mentioned you started at Newcastle University. So maybe, I think maybe you were a student at Newcastle University when you were events officer. So when you were studying, did you go straight into the music industry or did you look for a side job? Well, I think maybe the person missed what you were saying earlier on.
That's okay. I don't mind answering it again. When I went to Newcastle to do a degree in English and history,
Yeah.
with no great enthusiasm and a sort of equal amount of success, really. So I ended up on the entertainments committee by way of wanting something different to do, and through that I became the entertainments officer. And I worked briefly with I left actually to work briefly with a Newcastle band called White Heat, who was signed to Virgin at the time. And I sort of started out as a sort of embryo tour manager with them. But that didn't really work out for them. So that's when I ended up going down to London to work for a company called Ascot. So no, I didn't really ever end up thinking about doing anything else. I sort of fell into it, I suppose, rather than, I think it was always an aim. Once you started on the entertainment committee, you knew that people got to be the entertainment officer and then did go to work for promoters, that you sort of maybe subconsciously focused on it.
Right.
So it's all I've ever done apart from cleaning windows in my college holidays.
Right. Okay. Actually, that brings to mind something else. Actually, I guess in those days, that would be the 80s. There was still quite a big college circuit in the UK. How is that now? Is that?
I don't think it exists in nearly the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, the bigger universities and colleges still put events on, but not to the level that we used to do. As I said, pre-arena, there was only city halls in existence, and then after that, it was down to colleges.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a huge student circuit. I think they probably still, most of them still got concert halls, and they probably do events, but I think it's at a lesser scale, especially, you know, with the O2 academies coming along, which sort of bridge the gap between the university and city halls. It's the same sort of capacity.
Right.
And really over the years, there was always a slight issue, I think, with people playing universities and colleges if they were closed venues, which quite often they were.
Right.
And most places found a way to get around it so you could get any members of the public in. But that's not the case at an O2. I think probably quite a lot of university promoters now will go to like the O2 Academy in Newcastle and promote the shows there themselves.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. Here's an interesting question. Is there anything that you would tell your teenage self, your 18-year-old self, if you could give advice from what you know now?
And there's obviously a standard formula for these questions, because this is another one that I asked.
Okay.
Which is something I nicked from the Sunday Times Culture magazine, actually, which is the life and the day of
Okay.
The best advice you would give and the best advice you would give.
Yeah.
And I used this sort of visit when I read one Sunday. I was in Newcastle at the Metro Arena doing a visit, and somebody said that. And I said, I just read this thing in the Times this morning. It was a Sunday. And it says the best advice they were given was that no amount of guilt will change the past, and no amount of anxiety will change the future. Which I think was sort of spot on, totally unrelated to this, I know, but that's, you know, it's stuck with me ever since.
Yeah.
But I mean, on a realistic note, in terms of wanting to get into the business, the good people will stand out. And when I go and do visits with students, if I take 15 students along, it normally is the case that 2 or 3 of those will ask about 80% of the questions. And they're the ones, and you know, as I say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. You're not supposed to know the answers to it. So they'll ask because they've got the thirst for knowledge. And usually I can spot. And we've had a good number of people come through our programs, both on the art, we do artist liaison at festivals. We do some production placements with sound companies and lighting companies, Latitude and Leeds and Down Low. Mm-hmm. And people have gone on to work for the suppliers, and they will stand out. So be proactive. There's no excuse these days for not being able to get as much knowledge as possible.
Right.
any local supplier, anybody. So yeah, I mean, just be out there. And Andy Gray's last piece of advice said, as far as festivals are concerned, don't wear your best trousers. Which I sort of took his point, really.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here's okay. This is a cheeky question. Have you ever messed up big time?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's no. You can't do what we work in and what we do without making mistakes. And most artists actually understand this. And as long as you're not doing it on a daily basis, it's not the same thing every time, because that's not going to get you very far at all. But I mean, yeah, you could stand around and, I mean, yes, it's cold sweat time, it's really known. That's when somebody asks you something and you realise, like, somebody would say to me, I'd be down at the O2, and somebody would say, what time's the barrier coming? And I'd go, yeah, it's the barrier. Oh no. So I'd make some frivolous answer up and then try and find one really quickly. Because I hadn't done it. But what I did was some companies, SJM in particular, are probably the best promoters in the country, maybe even the world, split their advance between the office and the promoter's rep, which works generally. But I mean, I've been at shows where somebody's thought the office had booked the riggers and the office had thought the reps booked the riggers. So no one's booked the riggers, and you can't put a show into Wembley or the O2 without a dozen riggers. It did all happen. In terms of, I mean, festival-wise, I mean, I've made hundreds of mistakes. Probably, I think trust your instincts is quite a good one, actually, going back to the advice one, because that seems to work mostly. But yes, I can't really remember anything particularly massive in terms of festivals, but there's been lots of small errors, I can assure you.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So, okay. So here's another question. Day to day, when you're working on shows, what are you spending your time doing? I guess, you know, kind of like, I think that more or less means, you know, kind of like, is it a lot of face-to-face talking to people in normal times, or is it a lot of phone calls, or a lot of online time? I think that's what's behind the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a difference between the difference between working on festivals and working on an arena tour is as wide a difference as there is between theatre and rock and roll, for example. Right. It's a very different discipline.
Yeah.
In terms of an arena tour, you've got your act to look after, and that's it. And you know, helping out the support artists as well, but making, you know, the whole day revolves around them, what they want, and how you're going to get it for them, and doing it, you know, with as little confusion and issues as possible. When you're at a festival, you've got 10 acts to deal with every day, and they're all primarily, or really only, concerned with themselves. So there's a lot of, I mean, when you talk about, I mean, it used to be that a festival season would start at was then Donington, which is now Download, pretty much in the middle of June, and then go through around Europe and coming back to the UK until the end of August with Leeds and Reading. Now, a lot of those acts have been touring together throughout that time, especially the top of the bill. And at that point, they've either throughout that summer become the best friends imaginable, or they can't bear to be in the same field together. Now, I've had this, and I had it a few years ago with the Smashing Pumpkins and 9 Inch Nails, who were essentially co-headliners, and they really couldn't bear to be in the same field. So you've really got your work cut out in terms of diplomacy. That's another sort of skill you need to learn at that level to keep it on an even keel, but keep everybody happy.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's quite a high level of people skills in quite stressful circumstances then.
Yeah, I'd say that's the case. I mean, the ability to make people laugh is quite a good one, really. You have to laugh at some of this.
Yeah.
When things are going wrong, and frequently the day you wake up and expect it to be a very difficult day turns out not to be. And another day you think will be a real breeze turns out to be anything but. So you have to be prepared for all eventuality.
Right.
But we do have a sort of gallows humour up there, because you have to laugh at it, and some of the absurdities I mean, I worked on a coat. I don't know if you've ever seen a film called Spinal Tap. I'm sure you have. And actually, anybody out there who's listening, if you haven't seen Spinal Tap, you take one thing away from this, go and find it, watch it, because it's the most accurate but also funniest description of live music. Anyway, I worked as a stage manager at Donington, and the co-headliners were Kiss and Ozzy Osbourne. And it made Spinal Tap look like some sort of world in action documentary. It was the most circumstances you can imagine. So there's, yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, there's a different number of skills, and being a diplomat is one of them.
Yeah. There's a question here that I'm guessing you get quite a lot, actually, Steve, and you might choose not to answer it. And it is, who is the worst act you've ever worked with?
Well, I do get asked quite a lot, and when I touched on challenging employers earlier, I've worked with a few of those. I'm not going to name them. There's no real, I mean, everybody who gets to the top in that sort of profession has to have some element of ruthlessness in them and steel. So, you know, most people, you get very well paid for doing this, so you're expected to deliver, which is fair enough. Just as an example, though, I will give you one. The most incredible sort of act of festival mistiming ever was at Leeds. Now, fortunately, I wasn't there at this particular occasion because I was down at Reading and they didn't play at Reading that year. But Guns N' Roses managed to go on stage at exactly the same moment they should have come off. So that's 90 minutes late. So that's a £90,000 fine, and they've already been paid. So, as Axl Rose said shortly afterwards, I don't know why people book us because they know what they're like. And you know what? I completely agree with you. I don't know why people book us anymore. I believe things have changed since he works with ACDC, who never go on late and do not take their fans for granted. So I think that sort of changed it a bit. But yeah, I've been very lucky and worked with a lot of really good people. There's been some that have been difficult. I've spent time sniffing hotel carpets with disinfectants that are the wrong type. I've had guns pointed at me in the Kremlin. I've had guns pointed at me by the Thai secret police.
Right.
I nearly got impounded in the Lebanon. That was my fault. Another top tip, don't throw tantrums in dictatorship-run countries.
Okay, I hope everyone remembers that.
Yeah, well, yeah, do believe me.
Yeah. Actually, so for this is for me actually, Steve, because I don't understand this. When there's a fine, when somebody goes over curfew or whatever like that, so who's liable? Is it the producers of the event are liable for the fine?
Well, the way it works in theory is that if anybody overruns their allotted set time, they are liable for £1,000 per minute fine.
Right.
Which is what we tell everybody, which is what I tell the tour manager while the event's going on. You know, it'll work in different ways. You've got your very young, nervous tour manager at the start, and I'll go and say, you've got 10 minutes. And he'll say, we've got 2 songs. I said, you can have 10 songs as far as I'm concerned, as long as they're all under a minute long and segue into each other. So he starts making frantic signals to his band. Now, apart from Spanish waiters, there's nobody so accomplished as not signals to the side of the stage as any musician if they don't want to. But they also tend to be very keen on getting their fees. So, and £1,000 a minute when you're starting out, it's quite a lot of money. So, but eventually, it will come down to the promoter to pay the fine.
Right.
And actually, it's not so much the fine that's the issue. I mean, £90,000 is a lot of money for anybody. If you run over by half an hour, £30,000, well, it's a lot, but in the scheme of multi-million-pound festival, what's more important is that you're in breach of your local authority licence. Now, it's not so much an issue up at Leeds or down at Glastonbury, but at the Reading Festival, the main stage faces the most expensive houses in Berkshire, and they are sitting the other side of the river by their funds, waiting for you to go any second over to ring the police. So, and then you get objections to your licence. So that's one of the real issue lies, I think, more than the fines.
Mm.
And yes, theoretically, acts will get fined if they overrun. But as we all know that today's opener is tomorrow's headliner in some way, so you don't really want to annoy people too much.
Yeah.
And with the headliner, generally they had incremental payments, and they'd be paid in full upfront.
Right.
And they're certainly not going to give it back to you.
Right. Yeah. So there would be a challenge for the promoter to try and recover that from anybody. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting because what you said there. So obviously, if you've got a festival that's an irregular site, happens every year, you need to keep your neighbours happy in order for to continue for the future of the event.
Yes, I mean, down at Glastonbury, I mean, they've always given, very decent weekend tickets away to local residents.
Right.
And also with a lot of these places, I mean, it's worth millions to the economy.
Yeah.
So it's not really in anybody's interest not to have it. The only place where it does become an issue is it's like Hyde Park in London. I mean, no one apart from the Parks Commission and the promoters and the audience want those events to go off. Around Grosvenor House Hotel, all round Hyde Park. I mean, they just don't like late noise at night.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always something that you're faced with dealing with. But as I say, out of that, mostly, I sort of took it personally if we overran for some reason. I don't quite know why, but I did. And as I say, sometimes it's sort of out of your hands, but that's what you pay for to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we're getting to the end of our time. There's another question here that's interesting. So maybe this person missed some of the beginning of the. So, and they're saying, so would you'd recommend if somebody wants to get into live music, you'd recommend them just trying to get any experience that they can if they're just starting out? I think yeah, you did say that earlier on, didn't you, Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on that the more external work experience that you can do to build your CV or resume, the better it is when you come to go and see something. I mean, I'm a great believer in people coming through, going to see suppliers so they remember who they are. And in some ways, it's as well to make a bit of a pest of yourself than anything else, because people will remember you.
Right. Okay.
And be proactive. That's it's one thing that I can assure you won't happen is it won't come and find you.
Sure.
Unless you're particularly spectacularly lucky, you've got to go and find it.
Yeah. My understanding of it, and stop me if I'm wrong, is that people working on crews, so the lighting engineer or the monitor engineer, when they'll be on some kind of fixed term contracts that are going on for the course of a particular tour and something, and between tours they'll be resting, looking for the next one. Is that kind of how it works, sort of in terms of the employment structure for people?
Yeah, I mean, it is. A lot of people who work, as you say, sound engineers, line designers, backline technicians, whatever, are freelancers.
Yeah.
A company like Britannia Road, probably the biggest sound company, well, it certainly is the biggest sound company along with S&C in England and probably in the world now. They've merged with Claremont in America. Will have a certain amount of office staff. I don't know, probably 20, 30 office staff.
Yep.
But they're more likely involved in sales and maintenance and just planning, really.
Yep.
The people who tend to go out and operate and are designers and engineers, whatever, do tend to be freelancers.
Yeah.
But what you do find is it's not quite as much of a hire and fire business as you might imagine. And a lot of, in the same ways, a lot of musicians, artists like to keep the same crews together. So you get someone like Damon Albarn, who's had, as far as I can see, pretty much the same tour manager, same production manager, front of house engineer, monitor engineer, light designer, most of the backline tech. Through every sort of creation that he's had, you see the same people turn up.
Yeah.
So, and because of the level of, because you are well rewarded when you do it, you can afford to take time off. So you might find, I mean, I've got a really good friend of mine, an American production manager called Narcy Martinez. And really, he now works with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Florence and the Machine. And that's all he has to do.
Right.
Now, he might, the rest of the time, they will take time out. I mean, you could be nearly, the touring is not quite as intense as it used to be because then people do what's called adult touring and people take a bit more time off. between sort of sections of it, so the tour gets drawn out longer, but you get time off in the middle, which makes more sense.
Right. Right.
People's sanity, marriages, and the rest of it, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's more than one reason for these things.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So, you know, you can probably exist on 2 or 3 artists.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah. So people, they're pretty well paid when they're working.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah. When you get to arena headliner, festival headliner level, yeah, you are. But it's because you're, you know, at the top.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, Steve, that was really been fantastic, really interesting. And I hope, and I'm sure that the people who are asking questions there have had really good answers to the things that they wanted to know. And, you know, I really appreciate your time and attention in this fascinating stuff. Great.
Well, it's been great. And we, you know, we came up with the idea of Rob and I really came up with the idea of doing these things. Because we felt it was a way to keep people involved in a summer where we're not going to be taking people out to festivals or whatever.
Yeah.
And what we are looking to do is to replace some of the festival visits with, or maybe come do some college talks again.
Yeah.
We're going to do a bit more production placements with some of the suppliers. Certainly with Brit Row, Orbital and Adlib up in Liverpool have all agreed to take people on for a day's work experience here and there. So it's, and you know, we will go back hopefully next year to the RCAs and production placements.
Right.
So the idea is to keep people informed of what we're doing and planning to do.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and you very kindly earlier on you said that that we could share your email address with students and applicants if they had any questions to ask you directly, which is fantastic. I really appreciate that. And I think, oh, and there is your email address just appearing in the sidebar there. Okay.
Fiesta Rock Road, so named because my company was called Fiesta when I was in England, and I used to live on Rock Road, somewhat bizarrely.
Okay. Oh well, totally appropriate then.
It seems so, wouldn't it?
In one address, yeah. All right. Steve, thanks very much for your time today. Appreciate it. Okay, hope the rest of the day is good for you. That it's not too hot. Certainly, it's not too hot in London today. It's got the temperature's gone down a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's warm here, but I'm sure I'll find a way of spending it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for your time. Okay.
Thanks to everybody. I hope it was of use.
Thank you. Bye-bye.